Might as well jump if you're listening to us. I'm Charlie,
And I'm Cory.
and this week we will be discussing Van Halen's album 1984, which was released in 1984, part of our mini series of albums released that year. And a great way to end it off. I'm really happy to be doing this album. It's definitely a classic of the 80s in general, not just the year 1984.
Yeah, definitely a classic, definitely a timeless radio heavy one that has never gone away.
Never, and rightfully so. Spoiler alert: this album has held up very, very well over the years, which isn't unsurprising coming from Van Halen. Uh, I mean, Eddie Van Halen and his brother Alex were extremely skilled musicians, beyond many other of their contemporaries. Really, they did go to that extra level, and few vocalists had as much personality as David Lee Roth.
That's real. He was a natural. I watched Hot for Teacher getting ready for this weekend. It's just undeniable. He has this air about him that you love him or hate him, and there's both.
Yeah.
He just has this air about him. He's definitely a quintessential front man, in my opinion.
Most definitely. But around the time this album was being recorded in 1983, him and Eddie Van Halen were not quite seeing eye to eye because of course they weren't. This is Van Halen. If you know anything about them, they were always at each other's throats. Not always, but a good amount of the time. And Eddie Van Halen really did want to expand Van Halen's palette with the introduction of synthesizers into their music, because that was just coming up more and more as the 80s were progressing. David Lee Roth and the band's producer, Ted Templeman, really didn't love this idea. They thought they should stick to the hard rock that Van Halen was known for. And prior to this, the two previous albums showed different sides of the coin. So Eddie Van Halen was very involved with the Fair Warning album, which did okay, but was their least successful album up to that point. It didn't sell as well as its predecessors. David Lee Roth and Ted Templeman had a lot more control over Diver Down. Eddie Van Halen admitted to making a lot of concessions for that album, and that album sold very well and had a couple of hits on it, but those hits were covers. And the album just was not as well received critically as their others. So Van Halen was at a bit of a crossroads. They were certainly guaranteed to sell well, but where would they go as the decade was progressing? And that was really a question to be answered with 1984. But Eddie Van Halen built his own 5150 studios to experiment with the synthesizers and incorporate them on 1984. But there was still going to be plenty of the hard rock that the band was known for, and not really anybody was doing better at this point.
Yeah, I've done so much soul searching on it because I really try to put myself in the thought process of the band. When you have such a prolific virtuoso, in my opinion, as Eddie Van Halen, and he says, "Hey guys, I want to start adding some synths," there has to be a natural nervousness at the very least of like, "Oh my gosh, what? Like you are the man, you are our guitar god, so to speak, and you want to go synthesizer." I'm not going to tell you how I feel about the Eddie Van Halen synths yet, but it definitely must have been a big point. I mean, of course, they were at each other's throats on it, and it caused a very large discord. But as far as just human feelings, it had to be a little unnerving to hear this guy, Eddie Van Halen, of all people, say, "I think I want to do some synth work on this." Even if you trust him, and they did as a musician, it's got to be scary, man. I can see him, is what I want to say here. I can see where everybody was nervous.
I can too, and I also think that the introduction of Sims could have very easily led to Van Halen's core fan base accuse the band of selling out and going too pop for them, not really being a rock band anymore. that
Agree.
really it could have backfired on them. But I do feel that they moved a bit more into the pop direction with Diver Down. I mean, if you're going to be covering Pretty Woman and Dancing in the Street, there's a pop sensibility that they had, and it was
Agreed.
always there. I
Yeah,
mean, they're often considered the band that invented glam metal as we know it, which
heard.
totally makes sense. But yeah, with vintage covers of songs that even went before that. I mean, the first album you've got you really got me. Um, it was always a bit of a part of their brand, but this was still going to be a big jump that could alienate people. So it was a risk being taken, and it's not hard to see why David Lee Roth and their producer would be hesitant to go in this direction.
I mean, even if you look at last week, and if you haven't already listened, we did Born in the USA last week, but the synthesizer sound came up because it was something new. And for me, that was off-putting. And I said that last week. It has the propensity to be a sound that isn't expected, and it is. You never know how it's going to go over. So excited to see how it goes over on this album.
So am I. And this album was released. It was supposed to be released on New Year's Eve 1983, but it got pushed back a bit. It actually wasn't released until January 9th, 1984. And well, commercially speaking, it seemed that their risks paid off. This album did really well. It peaked at number two on the Billboard 200 for 5 weeks, behind Thriller, which basically means you were number one anyway. There was no beating Thriller. Like, number two then was number one.
That's real.
Like, you're on Thriller was beyond the charts
Yeah.
at this point in time. And Eddie Van Halen also noted that um Michael Jackson's hair caught on fire while he was shooting his Pepsi commercial at
Yeah.
the time this album was released, and he said that ended up probably helping his record sales quite a bit. And funny enough, of course, Eddie Van Halen's very famously on that album as
Yeah.
well.
That's what I was gonna say. Eddie's on two. If we're saying number two is number one, Eddie's on both number one albums at this point.
Yeah, he he was because in between, like in 1983, he was working on other projects as well, and because he was a virtuoso, he always had the music in him, and he just had to be creating. He was one of those people.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, so yeah, very successful album. By the beginning of 1985, it had already gone 5 times platinum. It was number six for the year on the Billboard 200. The only country it did top the charts in was Canada. Um, but I mean, it did pretty well throughout Europe too. It's gotten quite a few certifications. But the biggest being the 5 times platinum in Canada, which sales wise is gold here. In the United States, this album has now gone diamond. So 10 million copies shipped and sold, and it is only tied with their self-titled debut as their highest selling album. So a true peak for Van Halen. And of course it led to a massive tour, but in a crazy example, not the only band in 1985 to lose their leader at the height of their popularity, but that is what happened. David Lee Roth ended up going solo and leaving Van Halen behind, but he definitely went out on top. There's no denying that. And in a way, that was the perfect time to go solo. Might as well leave when you're on top. But just added to the messiness that is the Van Halen saga.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't care which way you cut it. Again, it's a love it or hate it. Either way you cut it, that is a huge loss.
Yeah, it is. And we're not going to debate the merits of
Nope.
Sammy Hagar today. That could be a discussion for another day. But
Yeah.
what is interesting about this album is this took 3 months to record, which for Van Halen standards was basically an eternity. All of their previous albums had been recorded in 2 weeks or less. Um, and that was just mind blowing to me. I probably did read it before actually, but I just didn't remember it. If you do want to hear about the Van Halen saga, of the initial David Lee Roth era. I highly recommend Noel Monk's book. He was the band's manager. Very good insider's look at Van Halen. I think it's called Running with the Devil, but I'm not 100% sure. But that would make sense if it was called that. But and if you like that band gossip, Noel Monk's got tons of it. So if you do want to learn more, read that book. I don't remember all of it. It's been a while since I've read it, but I remember enjoying it.
Yeah, I mean, for a 9 track album, 3 months, that for them is an eternity. And I know there were, I think it was somewhere around 7 or 8 tracks left on the cutting room floor, but still, um, maybe it was the new studio, maybe it was the Discord, but 3 months is a long time for them.
Yeah, by today's standards, oh, that's really short.
Or,
Because we wait quite some time in between albums these days, it feels like. But nope, it was a different industry back then. And this for Van Halen was a long time. So the 1983 was actually their first year without an album since their debut.
wow.
So, but right at the beginning of '84, they got a new one, and this was obviously an album cycle. Once again, Thriller really changed the landscape, and it wasn't the first to do it. I think Rumors started the
Or,
pop blockbuster as we know it, but Thriller definitely brought that into the MTV era and showed how bands could capitalize with videos and putting out multiple singles and squeezing all the hits that you can out. And well, Van Halen did it really successfully, as we can see. Not to the extent of Bruce Springsteen, like we discussed last week. This album had 4 singles, but still, they got a lot of mileage out of them. And well, they're still beloved songs today.
yeah, out of the four, I mean, out of the four, they're all still on the radio. I guess
Oh,
I'll Wait is probably one of the ones that doesn't hit as often on the radio, but I mean, they're all still out there in full rotation.
yeah, that they are. When you suggested this album to me, I thought, oh, can we? I really want to do that because it's just such a classic album. And honestly, you get into classic status with just like 3 or 4 radio staples, you automatically get a big push from that. But I think the real question is, what about the songs surrounding it? Are they um what do they bring to the table? That
Or
is the question. And to answer that question, I suggest that we get started with our track by track. But of course, before you do that, please subscribe to us where you're listening to us and leave us a nice rating and review. Also, follow us on social media. Links are in the description. So the album begins with the title track, which is really just a space age synth intro. It's a good timing for this, I would say. It has that like sci-fi feel, which again is a bit Orwellian with the dystopia of his book. I mean, I think it's a cool little intro. It sets the mood for it and really prominently displays the Sims, which shows we're going to be getting a bit of a different Van Halen on this album, with this new soundscape being introduced. So, in terms of that, I think it's effective.
yeah, I've done a lot of soul searching on this one too, as far as did it need to be its own? Could it have just been an intro on Jump? And I've come to the realization that it needed to be on its own. I also like to think that if this was dropped on a New Year's Eve type of deal, that this intro for someone who's just dropping it on the record player for the first time would almost be like a jumping off point is weak. It would almost be like a little tease before the real album kicks in, almost like a New Year's countdown. And I think it works out that way. I don't think if you would have went off of note one of the next song that this album would have started off as well as it did with this intro.
I mean, that's a good point to make, and it's kind of a it's for me, I have a bit of a hard time thinking of it that way, but that's just because the song after this is just so iconic and just embedded into our fabric at this point. Like to me, it could be an album opener, the next track, but maybe I think you're correct from the perspective of somebody buying this album release day, not having heard any of it. I would have been a little like this would have been a good tone setting because get that song may have come off as a shock to some.
Yeah.
Um if you were a Van Halen fan who had bought all their albums, to hear those opening synth notes on the next song probably would have been surprising, but now we're all used to him because the next song is none other than Jump. Um, I mean, this is it's one of those songs. It's like, what do you say about Jump by Van Halen? It's Jump by Van Halen, but no, 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 we can talk about it. So this song very prominently features the synthesizer. Um, But I do think that it melds really well with Van Halen's signature sound. It's still got a awesome guitar solo in it and rocks hard like it needs to. Um, Even if it is driven by its keyboard riff. And Eddie Van Halen had written this riff a couple of years before even recording the song. Um, and David Lee Roth ended up listening to it at the suggestion of Ted Templeman. And for a lyric, David Lee Roth saw a news story about somebody jumping to end their own life, and it actually gave Roth the idea of go ahead and jump, which they decided to instead just make it an anthem instead of a song about ending one's life of their own accord. Which is understandable. It was smart to make this a joyous tune. That's part of why it's lived on as even a sports anthem, because it just has that kind of thing to it. But Eddie Van Halen actually did admit to Daryl Hall that he copied the synth part from Kiss on My List, which didn't bother Hall at all. Which I mean it shouldn't have, because well, I don't think this is a hot tea take. Eddie Van Halen improved on it. I like Kiss on My List, but not as much as I like Jump. This song, it's a classic. It was a number one hit. It deserved to be a number one hit. It's still beloved today. It's not far off from a billion streams on Spotify. And Rolling Stone ranked it number 177 on their last greatest songs list. And I'm not going to fight them on that. I think that's a very good placement for it. You could even argue maybe should be higher, but either way, very deserved, not at all overrated. A classic song I'm never unhappy to hear.
Yeah, no, I'm right with you. I again, the importance of 1984 because we get this beautiful synth chord just boom, and then we get David Lee Roth jumping in with his wild voice work with a trademark scream, and you get Van Halen in the first 20 seconds of this song, even without Eddie's guitar riffs, which I think no, I won't even say I think, which for me is such a great thing for an opener. You really have caught not so much lightning in a bottle, but the essence of Van Halen in the first 20 seconds without Eddie's guitar, then you've already done your work here. We get Eddie's guitar work layered over it, which is even better because it becomes this super relatable as a Van Halen fan song, even more so at that point. But what I mean, this is a great opener. This is really how you open an album. This is one of those songs that I feel like at the end of recording, there's no way you can't look around the room and be like, that's a number one hit, or at least a hit, or at the very least, be super pumped at the sound that you just made. really well done all the way through. This one is up there in the ranks of the timeless classics for a reason. And this composition is nonstop. It never gives you a chance to, as a subconscious listener, not be inside of the song. It really never gives you a chance to do anything but dance and enjoy it. And that's what I look for from we look for from an opener. So it's enough said about Jump, but almost never enough said about this beautiful song. It's a good one.
Yeah, and it was a great single too. I mean,
Yeah.
Van Halen, for all the albums that they sold, they never even gotten into the top 10 of the pop charts before Jump. This
Wow.
was, yeah, it's mind blowing to think about, but that is the case. But this song did really introduce them to a new audience. It obviously, if it alienated any fans, not too many, they gained more new ones because of this song. Um, and you really its influence over the rest of the decade you can hear all over. I think many bands after this tried to do that synth rock combination, and I'm not sure anybody. There were some that got close. There were great songs after this, but from a critical standpoint, I'm not sure anybody ever quite topped this one.
All right.
There's some contenders. It would be an interesting study, but this was a really high benchmark, and it's one that a lot of bands tried to replicate, and most didn't even come close.
That's I'm 100% with you on that.
Yeah, that's that's not. I don't think that's much of a hot tea take there because
Nah.
it's Jump by Van Halen,
All right.
but it's not all synths on this album. Van Halen can still rock with the best of them, just full out, and they did so with the next track, which is Panama. This is not about the canal or the country. This is about a car that David Lee Roth saw racing in Las Vegas, and it inspired him to write a song. And it's just a classic heavy rocker. Eddie Van Halen said musically he was inspired by AC/DC's free chord style, which I can hear. It is a bit more complex than AC/DC because Eddie Van Halen is a virtuoso, but it does have that like sing along feel to it. They were just making a song for the masses, and that's not a bad thing. Not many bands did that better than AC/DC.
All
And
right.
Van Halen did it their way and did it really well. This is another rock classic, one you still hear all the time. This was the third single. It made it up to number 13 on the Hot 100. Um, I mean, it could be shocking in hindsight, but also not really because there were just so many hits in 1984. But yeah, I think it's another song totally deserving of its status. It's another song I'm always happy to hear, and it's got that monster sound to it, and they do it well. Not many can do it better.
Yeah, and agreed. I mean, we're already this early in the album with this automotive sense, but like you said, this AC/DC sort of sound here, I like to call it the VHDC sound that we're getting here. But even with that inspiration, here we are, track 3, after a synthesizer only intro and a synth heavy classic. We're back into a full Van Halen sound where we're not getting any of these nuances. We're getting what they do best, and that is rock and roll and heavy rock at that. Such a great song. We get a little breakdown here that for me is reminiscent of another song that we'll hear later on. And the funny part is that they both sort of deal with, at least in a musical mentality and a composition mentality, they both deal with this automotive type sound. This Panama always rocks, and it's a nonstop song, and I for me, it's perfect at this number 3 spot, especially going back into a first time listener mindset. This album is rolling and it's rolling hard. Really well done. A little bit of an anecdotal one. This is my most famous Monda Green of my whole entire life. I sang this song up until, man, I want to say like 2010 as Cannonball. And my best friend, our whole entire life, we used to go back and forth. This is pre-internet, but we used to go back and forth because he told me that it was cannibal, like someone who eats other humans. And it wasn't until I came down one morning in my kitchen and my prep cook had on 98 Rock and it was going, and I was singing it Cannonball at the top of my lungs. And he turned to me and he was like, "Did you say Cannonball?" I was like, "Yeah, I love this song. It's such a great one." He was like, "It's Panama." And I was like, "Yeah, no, I don't think it is."
Was that
But
Sean?
that was Adam. That was
Oh,
I was that many days old when I finally realized that this song entitled Panama was in fact Panama and not Cannonball. But a good Monda Green moment that I thought I'd share with everyone there.
so Sal thought it was Cannibal.
100%.
Oh boy.
100%.
That I do know a song called Cannibal. It's very different from this one, and much more recent. But oh, that's funny. I've always known it was Panama. Probably just because it came on the radio and said that, and I've had this CD for quite a long time too. This was a pretty as I was building up my collection. This was a pretty early addition to it.
Heard that.
And Panama was one of the reasons I bought the CD. I thought if we've got this and Jump and other good stuff, the rest of it's got to be good. And well, let's see if it is. The next track is Top Jimmy. Less heavy than the previous song. Probably, I think this is the bluesiest rocker on the album, actually. Um, I think it's a fine little song. It's not super long. None of the songs are super long, but this one's even shorter than the rest of them. Um, if I'm gonna say this is the weakest on the album for me. It is a bit of a filler track in my opinion. It's not bad to listen to. It's got a great solo from Eddie, but you could say that of like all the Van Halen songs. So, especially during this era. So, yeah, not bad, but not my favorite either.
Yeah, the reason this one makes it up from like a gun to the head for me on this album is mostly because of my love for Eddie Van Halen's work. Um, Coming in at the number 4 spot, it really has a great tempo to, even though it chugs along, it brings this album down a bit, which I think is needed here as far as our pacing. But that Eddie Van Halen harmonic work in the front of this song that just brings us in is top notch. Like you said, we get a great solo and that lifts it up for me. I don't have this one as so much as filler as more so of just a bit of a dark horse, a bit of an underplayed song inside of this album, a deep cut, if you will, something that I go back to, but really more so for just that harmonic lick from Van Halen and that feeling throughout. So yeah, not top track on this, but I think it adds enough and does its job enough where it's a very solid number 4 here.
Yeah, I agree that it's solid. I don't think any song on this album is horrible and unlistenable.
Heard,
Spoiler alert.
heard,
Everything chugs along very nicely. And at this point in time, they had not discovered banality yet. They
heard.
they still had that energy to them. So, everything's listenable here, and it's just I mean, it's tough competition, and I think some of that tough competition does come from the next song, which is Drop Dead Legs, which Eddie Van Halen described as almost a jazz version of Back in Black. So VHDC again here. This is definitely the hardest rocker straight up on side one, and possibly the whole album because it doesn't have the big heavy chorus of Panama to make it a bit more radio friendly. Though this is a rock radio staple over the years. Um, but as far as VHDC, I don't think it gets really. There's no better encapsulation of that than this song. It's got them in their wheelhouse lyrically and musically. I mean, this is a band playing to the best of its ability as a functioning unit, is what I'm hearing on this song. Everybody brought their A+ game here, and uh, the results show. This is a great rock song. That's it.
Yeah, I love this song. At the risk of sounding vulgar here, this ends up like a stripper song for me. For the first half of it. And that's their sound, and that's how they roll, and I dig them for that. I guess I do have a beef with this song, and the beef is that it is one of the longer songs on this album, and none are over 4:33, but one of the longer songs on this album, and only really the first minute, 2 minutes and 30 seconds are this song. I feel like after that, it goes to what first listen you feel like is going to be a bridge, but really ends up being this 2 minute long outro that, don't get me wrong, is musically stellar, and it's composed well, but that last 2 minutes is a little bit underused, if I will. Maybe that's a hot tea take here, is that the last 2 minutes of Drop Dead Legs is self-fulfilling for the band, almost selfish, as far as just going and jamming out and filling time, even though it's beautiful, and I'm not taking away from it musically. It's just, I don't know if it's 100% Drop Dead Legs the whole way through. Now that's me hardcore nitpicking on this song. It really does achieve the goal of slowing it down a bit inside of these middle tracks, and as far as one that ends the first side, that outro does work well for a listener to want to flip this album over. Again, an awesome song, and really one of their most dialed in tunes here. I just beef a little bit with that outro.
Yeah, that is a hot tea take, I'm afraid.
Heard.
I I think it is, but well, we all gotta have it. We all gotta have it. Wouldn't
There
be
we go.
turntables and tea without one. But now it's time to flip the album over and begin side two with Hot for Teacher. It needs no introduction. I know those drums are playing in your head right now as I said Hot for Teacher. Iconic this song and video is. All around 110%. This is called one of the best rock songs of all time for a reason. It's not at all overrated. You could yeah. There is just no song that better encapsulates Van Halen's sense of humor and their musicality better than Hot for Teacher. Like, this is Van Halen in one song, I think. This really is. It might not even be my number one favorite Van Halen song, but I can't think of a tune that better sums them up as a band than Hot for Teacher. And to have a funny video to go along with it just is icing on the cake of this brilliant song. Yeah, Cory, what do you think of Hot for Teacher?
I'm gonna go first and say iconic video aside, because the video is great. Oh, I'm gonna curse. I'm gonna let loose on this one because I've got it playing in my ears right now, and it's that shit. I mean, there, you open a second side of an album like this, I don't care who you are, you're running around the room, you might punch somebody by accident, you might throw a few things, you might jump off the couch. I know I did all those things, all of the above. Every time I listen to this song, I am just fully encapsulated by its sound, and the energy of it. The Lamborghini revving up underneath those drums and just having everything rolling, and then it just bangs off to. I'm gonna maybe do it a bit of this service here, but like when it goes into that empty, small, quick riff reminiscent of ZZ Top for me, and then back into those Alex Van Halen drums, it's you got David Lee Roth talking over top of it in this comical narration. It's such a great song. There's no way you can take away from this. This is for me up there top songs of all time as far as just conveying that energy and that nonstop. I love the way you say that this or said that this encapsulates 100% of Van Halen, because I couldn't imagine saying the name Van Halen without immediately thinking about this ultimate rocker. This is the one, man. It connects on so many levels in a masculine way too. These boyhood fantasies of a teacher. There's so much relatable content here in all aspects of this composition, and then Eddie shreds on top of it like he always does. But such an iconic piece. I will ramble on forever about this, so yeah, I'll just say it. This is
Well,
that jam. This is that jam.
but though, as you speak of the boyhood fantasies that the song is about, I just want to say you don't have to be straight to enjoy this song.
Heard.
Just if you can't accept that, I'm telling you it's okay. I'm just
Yeah, no, you know what? That's true. I say boyhood, but I mean childhood fantasies of a teacher that you fancy, or
yeah.
male or female.
That
Yeah,
doesn't
it's
matter. It
relatable.
doesn't matter. And the song kicks ass. That's the main point of it. Whether you relate to it or not, it's hot for teacher. And I do have a shocking thing to announce about this song, though. This was the fourth single of the album, which you probably assumed it was a single based on the fact that there was a video. Despite this song being iconic and a radio staple today, at the time, this charted at number 56 on the Hot 100.
Insane.
It is insane. But charts have not always summed up Van Halen's appeal. It's not the only Van Halen chart travesty, in my opinion. I mean, Running with the Devil only made it to number 84. So
Yeah.
those radio stations were not doing what they had to at the point in time. But it doesn't matter. The songs are classics today as they should be. They're rightfully regarded as such. And at that point, you just forget the Hot 100.
No,
And
I'm with you.
well, a perfect example of saying that would actually be the next song, which is "I'll Wait." The next Sims song on the album. For all the talk of Sims being on this album, they're really only present on this song, besides "Jump" and the intro. And this song had a bit of a messy backstory to it, actually. So, Ted Templeton was just not liking this song at all. And he called one Michael McDonald, formerly of the Doobie Brothers, and by this point a solo artist, to contribute some ideas to the song. And he did so, I think at one point with David Lee Roth, but he wasn't initially credited. According to Eddie Van Halen in the book Eruption Conversations with Eddie Van Halen, Michael McDonald ended up suing Van Halen, which, I mean, yeah, I would have for credit on the song. Because if you did it and it was on a Diamond album, yeah, I think I'd want those royalties. And I think you can hear that influence on this song of a Michael McDonald. I do think this is the most straight up pop song on the album. I mean, it just has that thing to it. I do enjoy the synths on this song. It does not reach the heights of Jump. Let me be clear. But I actually think this song's a bit slept on, even though it was the second single and made it up to number 13. Um, and it makes sense why it was a single. I mean, after Jump, of course, you'd want to do the um, synth sound again, and it was just in keeping with what was popular at the time. I mean, a lot of the songs of 1984 were synth heavy, and these ones hold up well, like many of the best songs of that year. Um, it's not it the streams of this are not even close to that of the other singles. I've never heard it one time on the radio. There wasn't a video for it. But I think it's a bit slept on by today's standards because for what it is, this is a good pop rock tune. And meeting of two sensibilities you just might not have expected. Doobie and Van Halen.
Heard.
Um, I mean, ZZ Top, you could easily pick up with Van Halen. That's not a stretch. Doobie Brothers, a bit so, but they met here, and I think the result was effective.
Yeah, super effective. This is a strong synthesizer song, whether it comes from Van Halen or anyone else. It really has that different feel, and I love it. This is an undersung song here. This is an underplayed song. This is one that doesn't get enough credit. Um, I do have. We always talk about pacing. For me, as much as I love Hot for Teacher, I think that, and I've done a lot of fighting with myself on this, but I think this would have been a much more solid opener if you're driving home the synthesizer-ness of Van Halen at this point for this second side. You won't lose Hot for Teacher, and ultimately I'll let you know where I think Hot for Teacher could have ended up. But I feel like if you open the second side on this, now you have two sides that really get that point across. This is strong enough, and it's a single to open an album or to open a second side, and I really think it would have excelled a little bit more as far as making it out and being heralded with it being the opener for the second side. I love this song. I can't get enough. I mean, other than the fade out at the end, which is just a pet peeve of mine, I think I know it's a solid composition. It's a solid tune, and it shows again how I go back to the synthesizers with Bruce and the boys last week, but more so it just shows how it can really be done well, even though it's not Eddie's main instrument or first instrument. It's something that a musician of his caliber can do and do it well. And I really dig that for that.
Yeah, I do get where you're coming from. This is a pretty big shift from Hot for Teacher.
Yeah.
I will say that pacing wise, there is a big change in dynamic. But I just also couldn't imagine not opening up a side with Hot for Teacher because that song is such a force of nature.
Heard.
Because, but I mean, it it's just when you have these songs to put with each other, it's a challenge to put that together. So, I mean,
Heard.
kudos to whoever sequenced it. You did something right. But we're actually sadly almost getting to the end of the album, which stinks because I'm having such a good time.
Heard.
We're at the penultimate track now, which is Girl Gone Bad. Eddie Van Halen came up with the idea for this song while vacationing with his wife, Valerie Bertinelli, who was a sitcom star and is still around today. You can see her doing her thing. Beautiful woman.
Cool.
And um, he had this idea and just had to do it. So he got out a cassette and recorded his guitar part for Girl Gone Bad while his wife was sleeping. So that's that mind at work. He was that guy. Just virtuoso, always had to be creating. Um, and well, I mean, it worked for him. I think this is a solid rock tune. I don't think it reaches the heights of the previous two songs, but that's just really difficult to do. I mean, I think it fits. This is a song. It fits in Van Halen's wheelhouse, kind of in that way of like your Drop Dead Legs, Hot for Teacher, kind of a similar subject matter. Um, Even if it's not as musically dynamic as those songs, but I don't think everything could be because those are such full throttle tunes. It's okay to have something a bit more sedate, and we are getting to the end of this. So I think this song works for what it is.
I'm with you that it works for what it is, but I have to disagree with you because on the complexity of this composition, I'm gonna hot tea take. This one reminds me of Rush's YYZ or YYZ, depending on who you are, especially in its complexity. If you listen to the way this is put together, if you really take a look, there are so many parts written here. As crazy as it is, and as hard as it must be to get out of a bed with Valerie Bertinelli, in my opinion, to imagine Eddie writing these parts inside of a closet. This is not an acoustic song that he is just plucking around with. This is a banger for me. This is hands down the lost track on this album. I never hear people talking about it. In fact, for me, it was one that I wasn't even really 100% familiar with, and now is way up there in my listening playlist. This one is a really, really complex composition, and I love it for that. um I don't think, maybe I just don't think it's as sedate as it should be here, coming off I'll Wait. And is it bringing it back up? It could have been, but ultimately, I don't think the next track really delivers with the power it should. Spoiler alert. But yeah, I love this song. I really do. It really does remind me of YYZ. I hope someone else can feel me on that, but
I
it really does.
did not hear that. I'm going to have to listen to them side by side now,
Heard.
because I have to check this out and hear what you're saying. But it's interesting that you speak to the power of the next song because the next song does not originate from this era. It's actually a really early Van Halen song, House of Pain. Um, this song actually was recorded as a demo produced by Gene Simmons of Kiss. So before their debut album, another one of the demos at this time was Running with the Devil, which fully formed, of course, that ended up on the debut and as part of their history making run immediately. This was reworked for 1984, and I do agree with you in that I think you can tell this is from a different era. The boys had definitely grown a lot since that time, and obviously there were songs that were fully formed when they recorded these demos with Gene Simmons, but they didn't end up staying with him, and you can tell it's an early effort. I don't think it's a terrible closer, but a bit of an underwhelming one. I just because we heard what they were actually creating for the rest of the album, and this is from almost a decade earlier at this point.
Yeah, this one's tough for me, man. Knowing that there was other stuff on the cutting room floor, and knowing what the rest of this album sounds like, it's tough for me. It's out of place, and especially as a closer to this whole entire package, it just hot tea take. It's a letdown for me. It's not a terrible song, but what it is a song that doesn't really fit, even with its Van Halenness. Don't get me wrong; it's got Eddie riffs, it's got wildness, it's got Alex Van Halen, awesome drums. It's a Van Halen tune, but here it falls flat, which is wild. I'm listening to it right now, literally, and it's not flat musically, but as far as where it is on this album, for me, it's wrong. And it finishes way. It finishes terrible. We do a soft fade out on a final song. on an album that has kicked our ass the whole entire way through. And I know I had said this before, but you go back to Hot for Teacher, it has a finale finish, like a full on finale finish. Hot for Teacher ends this album. You open with maybe Girl Gone Bad, but I'd like to say you open the second side with I'll Wait to stick with the opening of the first side with the synthesizers, and you finish off with the biggest banger of this whole album, and that's Hot for Teacher with an already written in finale closing. I've had such a hard time with that this whole entire week, as far as trying to really get behind why they did that, especially with a song like House of Pain that clearly is just out of the element here. It's just out of place. Again, not a bad song in any right, but out of place here. So unfortunately, as a closer, it just doesn't work for me.
I can see where you're coming from. I do think it's a bit underwhelming as a closer, especially considering just all the songs that we've been hearing. And that way, it kind of reminds me of Jagged Little Pill ending with
Herb,
Wake Up. Like,
Herb,
that was such an underwhelming after, again, kicking our asses the whole time.
yeah,
And yeah, you would just have to think. I do think there was probably a better song on the cutting room floor than this one, especially since this was a leftover from a previous era.
yeah,
Like, clearly they were creatively on fire at this point in time. So, I don't know. It's not terrible at all, though. It's
no.
not an unpleasant listen. But yeah, definitely not a highlight of the album. I will say that. And I'm still sad it's over,
I
though.
know, I know.
What a fun album.
It's it's my small beef with this album is it packs a punch, but it goes away too quick.
I agree. It's a short album. But they made every minute count. I think everything on here definitely leaves an impact of some kind, and that's what Van Halen did. And they just have a great story to them. And I'm glad you mentioned Alex Van Halen. I actually saw he has a book coming out in a few weeks called Brothers. So I'm guessing that's going to be about him and Eddie. I'm very curious to check that out, actually.
Yeah, I think I'd pick that up too.
Yep, I definitely read it. But all right, final grade for the album.
Van Halen 1984, front to back, one of the most quintessential rock albums of its era. It is packed from the opening synthesizer of 1984, but more so Jump, all the way to I'll say Girl Gone Bad with just a real, for me, misstep with House of Pain as far as just pure power. This it's a nonstop run through. It almost feels like the history of Van Halen if now looking back at it. But it really is. I'm going to steal what you said earlier about Van Halen encompassed, but for me, this album is Van Halen 100% to me, and I love it for that. Like I said, really only one misstep here as far as pacing goes, and it's by far one of the smallest missteps we've seen in a while. This earns a high B plus, almost an A for me, but B plus for me. I love this. I love this album.
Yeah, it's a B plus for me too. Just hard to find the better rock album of the era. And for me, I do think there is a bit of a gap in quality between the hit singles and the album tracks. But I think that speaks more to just the high quality of the singles rather than the album tracks being bad or weak. Because this is a really is a solid front to back listen. There's just very high highs on this album. Um, and that is a risk that a lot of albums face. But they didn't give us nothing in between the singles. So thank you for that, Van Halen. Favorite track on the album, Gal.
Odd for Teacher, easy.
Uh, I mean, yeah, easy, quintessential, but my pop loving heart has to go with Jump.
There you go.
I
There you go.
I love those. I love that. Oh, I just love it. But neither of them are wrong answers.
I'm
They're
gonna
they're
finish. Yeah, I'm gonna finish up here and go jump off a couch. That's
yeah.
as far put on a hover teacher and jump around.
Yes, jump around. Hey, that's a different song though. Different, less relevant band. No disrespect, but we're talking about Van Halen today.
This is real.
But yes, I'm really glad that we got to discuss this band finally because they're just such a fun band to listen to and discuss.
Agreed.
So it took us a while, but we finally got there. And we are going to be switching gears to the present day next week.
Oh yeah.
So, if you've been paying any attention lately, you may have been hearing about Katy Perry a bit since July and how she just is not having the best year in terms of putting out an album and promoting it and all of that. And I have a lot of thoughts on it. I do. And I don't think I've been more excited to do a episode of Turntables Tea than I have this one. Because now Katy Perry's 143 is out. There have been some reviews already, but we are going to be adding our voices to um we're going to be adding our voices to this discourse. And I think that we do have something new to say about it. And I'm very excited to share that with everybody who is willing to listen. So yeah, really excited to discuss this and just stay tuned for next week. It's a bit of a shift from Van Halen, I understand that, but there's a lot to discuss and I can't wait to dive into it.
Bring your cups because we got tea upon tea upon tea upon tea with this
Yes.
lady. With this lady and the way things are going right now, there is more than enough to talk about. So I'm excited as well. This is a neat one to really pick apart and discuss fully. So I'm excited about that.
Yes. So yes, you know, we will be determining next week if it really is a woman's world and if we're lucky to be living in it. Uh-huh.